Welcome to practice. Now, last week we explored Sukha, a spacious ease, a quiet joy that arises not from perfection, but from a compassionate presence that we cultivate as we practice yoga. Now, today we're going to turn towards its sacred counterpart, Dukkha, often translated as pain, suffering, unease, contraction, or difficulty. The word Dukkha comes from du, which means bad, and ka, which is space or an axle hole, evoking an image of a misaligned wheel, that we have a rough ride or there's a grinding sense of something isn't flowing smoothly. And we all know that feeling immediately, that heavy heart, the clenching of our jaw, the restless mind, the tightness of the chest when grief visits, or that dull ache when we are disappointed, or that fire of anger, of rage, of resentments, the grudges that arise, or the confusion of loss. But here, when we are practicing, yoga becomes an invitation not to fix or avoid or escape dukkha, but to turn towards it with presence, wisdom, and compassion. And yoga doesn't say, don't suffer. It says, suffering is a part of life, and let it become your teacher. As we reflect on last week's session, in the Bhagavad Gita in 933, Krishna reminds us that the world is impermanent and filled with sorrow. Therefore, take refuge in him. And this is not a resignation, it's clarity. That yoga teaches us to meet our suffering, not as a failure, but as a gateway to understanding, humility, to a deeper connection with life and to each other, that we all are going to suffer. And what we are trying to do in our mat is become more familiar of understanding the different hues, colors, shapes, textures of suffering, so we can learn how to be with our own and therefore utilize tools, refined tools to be of service to other people. So dukkha can obviously be grief or illness, heartbreak, but it can be very subtle. The underlying dissatisfaction, that hum of anxiety, that feeling like something's wrong, or it's not enough as it is, or I'm not enough as I am. And in yoga, we invite ourselves to name it gently, clearly, to feel it into our body, to witness it in its texture, its temperature, its shape, and listen to its voice, that we might ask, where do I feel this contraction in the body, energy, or mind? What am I clinging to? What am I pushing away? And what does this pain want me to listen to? So it's not self-judgment or criticism. It becomes a sacred curiosity, this idea of svadhyaya, this self-study, as we welcome ourselves in the heat of our practice, that tapas, in understanding and gaining more self-knowledge, and then becoming more skillful. The Yoga Sutra says, in 2:16, it says, future suffering can be avoided. And we do this by not denying pain, but understanding the causes of it. So this is the roots of why we suffer, the kleshas, the mental emotional afflictions. We did this a few weeks ago. And you will notice as you practice fear arising, your egotism of thinking you're more than or less than, you're good or bad, all this kind of stuff that draws you into attachment, aversion, and eventually you start to wake up and see that you're ignorant of your own true nature. You're lost in the stories, you're lost in the opinions and the beliefs and the biases and the conditioning. And all of a sudden, dukkha asks you to pay attention to it, to see me. They say darkness can't exist if light is present. So we welcome our dukkha into the light, so we can see it, so it can express itself, so we can hear it. And it asks to be held, not solved, held in the arms of the breath, of our loving awareness, of that compassionate inquiry. So in our yoga practice today, notice where your body resists, where it tightens, where you retreat. Can you stay with what is? And I'm going to design the practice to challenge you to actually face the dis-ease, discontentment, the dissatisfaction, that kind of pain and suffering of, putting your body into certain contortionist poses or practices that really bring up that heat. But that heat, that tapas, is that heat for positive change if you so inquire with a sacred curiosity, a wonderment in understanding and holding your dukkha. Can you breathe there gently? Not to push through, but to soften towards. This is that radical grace of yoga. Not to rise above your suffering, but to sit with it kindly. Not to get over it, but to get under it, into the source, into the sacred message that it's trying to share with you. So Patanjali teaches, as we reflect on last week's practice, that in Sutra 112, that the mind is still through practice and non-attachment. We practice showing up, Abhyāsa, that focused, diligent practice, that dedicated practice in letting go, Vairāgya. That detaching with love from what you observe is arising in the field of your body, energy, and mind. Your resistance, your retreating, your avoiding, your attachment, your fear, your ego getting involved in telling you a story. And we practice again and again as often as we breathe. We show up, that Abhyāsa, in the art of surrendering to this moment just as it is, Vairāgya. So yoga is not just what we do on our mat. It's how we meet ourselves there. And in our practice today, we will observe the breath as a mirror of that inner weather, You'll notice that you'll hyperventilate and you're going, why do I feel so anxious? Or you're grunting and observe the breath and how you're feeling irritated, agitated, intolerant, impatient, angry. Notice if you're holding the exhale out and not wanting to breathe in, that depressive, disassociated response. So observe the breath as a mirror. And then balance your effort and ease in your pose. Make sure that there's sthira and sukham in every pose. This is going to progressively get more challenging in our sequence. So make sure that you really feel that stability in body, energy, and mind, and then an ease in which you take that asana in body, energy, and mind, sthira and sukham, and notice where you do resist and where you do grip, and create space around the discomfort, not forcing change, but allowing that awareness to emerge. And bring more loving kindness to the parts of ourselves that we normally turn away from. Be your own friend. Bring some compassion to it. Open some quiet joy and touch what delights you about that moment. And then finding equanimity in your body, energy, and mind, Sutra 133, or the 4 Brahma Viharas. Really cultivate that loving kindness approach to wherever you're struggling. And when we hold space for dukkha in our practice, we learn to hold it in life. To be with what is in its full, raw, unfiltered human expression, with steadiness and softness, and ultimately love through whatever we have to go through. We open a gentle, honest presence, and that deeper truth reveals itself that Sukha and Dukkha are not enemies. They are dance partners. They give rise to another. They make each other meaningful. And as we journey through that shadow, we are touched by light. We breathe into our contracted state and we find expansion. So as we begin this practice, let us not escape our sorrow. Let us hold it with sacred hands, bow to what hurts, and remember that we are not broken by dukkha, but we are being shaped, softened, and made sacred by it. So welcome to practice where we meet our suffering, our dukkha, with more of a compassionate presence, opening up to our own self-realization as we find ourselves in this moment just as we are.